would kindly open to the book of Genesis, where we've been going through our series Sunday nights, and I believe now we are wrapping up some thoughts in Genesis chapter 27, now having the chance to look at Jacob's story, and we'll just pick up there where we left off last time and kind of explain where we are at. But in Genesis chapter 27, we had just reached that blessing that Isaac gave to Jacob. Now, he was supposed to give that blessing to Esau because Esau was the firstborn, and that was the tradition. But because Rebekah had devised the plan, now we don't exactly know all the details of why she wanted Jacob to receive the blessing and not Esau, the older son. But chances are, maybe she thought it was best, knowing that God had given the promise that he was going to make a great nation out of the descendants, out of the sons of Isaac. And she perhaps had seen how Esau was tricked into selling his birthright. And so maybe there was some wisdom there, but we know that God is not pleased with deceitfulness, and we kind of applied a lesson out of all of this, that we may be tempted sometimes. Whenever we say the word tempted, we have a negative feeling to it, but we may be tempted sometimes to use our own wisdom and try and control situations because we think it would work out best this way or would work out better one way or another way. But the overall thing, principle guiding us in our life, is that God is in control. And a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the worry gets taken out of our life when we don't have to control every little thing. Now, we want to keep our responsibility. We want to be wise and helpful the best we can. But the reality is we should never have to use deceitfulness or some type of craftiness to control the situation. God is in control. God gave a promise to Isaac, as he gave the promise to Abraham, that through his family, first a great nation would be made, Israel, and then through that nation, all the nations of the world would be blessed. He's going to bring that about by sending the Messiah, Jesus Christ, through Israel to offer salvation to everyone of every nation. But God does not need someone to be crafty and deceitful to make sure he could accomplish his plan. God is the Almighty God of the universe, of the heaven and earth, and he is going to accomplish his will. But we understand that maybe, how we often use the phrase, maybe they meant well or they mean well, and she tried to do the right thing, talking about that idea of sometimes people do the wrong thing and they justify it by saying it's the greater good, it's the best case scenario. But the problem is we don't know what the best case scenario is. Only God knows that. And so it's better in the first place to simply trust God that he's in control and he's going to accomplish his plan and he's going to accomplish his will. But we see this is what they decide to do. Jacob tricks his father and he receives the blessing instead of Esau, his brother. And we're going to see that idea of using craftiness, using our wits, our intelligence to try and control everything, that's going to bring problems into Jacob's life. And the other thing we see is that earlier Isaac had repeated a type of sinful behavior that he saw his father Abraham do. Abraham would go around, and whenever he feared Pharaoh or some other kinds of the ruler of Egypt or another ruler, he would lie and say his wife Sarah was his sister. And it was revealed that Abraham did that because he feared that if he was to be killed, what would happen to his family? Well, Isaac picked that up, and he did the same thing. You notice a chain here, a sequence? Abraham does that out of fear, but he caves in and he does that. Now Isaac sees it, Isaac copies him, and now Jacob realizes, I can control things if I'm deceitful. You see how this just goes down the line of the generations. And so eventually we have to realize the only way this stops is if we realize, let's just trust God and decide to always do the right thing. And sometimes we're going to suffer for doing the right thing. Sometimes it's not going to be the best. It's not going to work out the best for us in this life. Sometimes we would say, wow, if I just lied, if I just tried to control the situation, I may have gotten away with it. But we have to say, if I just trust God and I do the right thing, He's going to accomplish His will in my life and other people's lives. And so much could have been prevented if that lesson was exercised in their life so often. But we see that Jacob learns this craftiness, and he's going to use this in his life. And now he cheats his brother Esau out of the blessing. And so there in verse 27 there, if you look down to what the blessing that Isaac gave him, it says, he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. And cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. That was the promise that God made to Abraham. Now, when we first talked about that promise, we mentioned that Genesis, Exodus, these aren't just a bunch of random stories like God felt like telling us about a flood and then the Tower of Babel and then a serpent in the garden. No, God is working through a plan. And it started in the garden when they sinned, but now sin has overcome mankind. And what is He going to do? He promises Abraham, first I'm going to give you descendants. He's going to give him lots of children, and they're going to grow up, and He's going to make a nation out of them. And out of that nation, He's going to bring about one son, and this son is going to bless all the nations. So not just Israel, all the nations on the face of the earth. Now that is seen in Jesus Christ, and it is summed up in John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in Him will not perish but have everlasting life. See, that is the promise completed that God made in the garden when He told the woman Eve that the serpent is going to be against her children. You know, that serpent Satan. But He says the day's going to come where your seed is going to crush him on the head, and he may bruise your children on the heel, meaning that it's going to be an attack, but it's not going to completely destroy them. But there's going to be a seed that comes along that crushes Satan on the head. And so that's found in Genesis chapter 3. And so Jesus fulfills all of that. So we can see, starting from Genesis through the rest of the Old Testament leading up to Christ, these aren't just random stories. God is working through His plan to bring about Jesus Christ, the one who will conquer sin for the world. Now it's up to the world to reject that salvation or accept it, but at least God is offering it, right? And He's going to do that through Jesus. But here, naturally, it would have been Esau who's the firstborn and following the line and receiving that blessing. Instead, it's Jacob. Now, God did not tell Rebekah to try and trick Esau and to have Isaac give that blessing to Jacob, his younger brother, instead. God did not tell Jacob to do it. But I think what it tells us is that God really, it doesn't take much effort from God to accomplish His will. He's that much in control. He can simply let human beings have free will, and because He has all power and all knowledge, He can accomplish His will regardless. Now, it doesn't mean He approved of what Rebekah and Jacob did by tricking Esau, but it does tell us that no matter the situation, God is in control. And I think what we walk away with is, if God is in control, why were they even, crafty and deceitful in the first place, right? But we know the point is not that these are perfect people. And the point is that these are very flawed people, and that reinforces to us that the human problem since the very beginning is sin, and only Jesus is going to help us overcome that. So that blessing is given, But then when we drop down to Esau's response in verse 34, and we're kind of skipping a little, but he says, as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. And so we talked about how the name Jacob itself means he cheats. Really, it means he supplants, because when Esau and Jacob had come out of the womb, Jacob was holding Esau's heel. But the supplant word kind of means he cheats. And so basically Esau is saying, he cheated me out of my birthright, he cheated me out of my blessing, and so he's living up to his name, right? And so they named him that because what Jacob was doing as an infant when he came out of the womb. But now Esau is using his name to say, look, he's living up to his name, he's supplanting, he's cheating. But interestingly enough, Jacob does live up to that name when we follow along his story, because he has learned in his family this craftiness. And craftiness in order to try and control the situation, to try and control his life. But sooner or later, when we get to Jacob's life, we're going to see a valuable lesson. We cannot control every aspect of our lives. We cannot control how every single thing is going to happen. We have to put our trust in God that He's in control. We keep doing our responsibilities and we do the best we can, but we're not going to be able to control everything. And what we're going to see by the end of Jacob's life is, if he understood that, a lot of the pain he is going to face perhaps could have been prevented. But we're going to get there. And so he gives, in verse 39, Isaac, his father, gives Esau some words. And it says, he answered and said to him, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high, by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now, this may be confusing to some of us, like, okay, he blessed Jacob, but did he really have to say this to Esau? If we do not realize that this is prophecy, and oftentimes when God speaks to people in prophecy, He's simply telling people what is going to happen. And the person, Isaac here, he's relaying the message, but he really can't change the prophecy. It's not up to him. And so what he's saying here is that the descendants of Esau, they're going to be a people of war, but he's going to serve his brother Jacob. Jacob is going to become Israel, but someday Edom is going to break out of Israel's control. And they're going to break free, and that day is going to come. And so all of this is going to be fulfilled in the rest of the Old Testament. And so he's simply saying what is going to be the case. Of course, we've already dealt with what is said in the book of Romans, where Paul the Apostle is quoting actually from Malachi, where he says, Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated, because that also confuses many people. But we talked about there, he's not talking about the individual Jacob and the individual Esau. He's talking about the fact that Jacob's descendants became Israel, Esau's descendants became Edom, but God promised Israel, again, only because of His plan to bless all nations through Jesus Christ, who would be born in Israel. He promised Israel that He would bless those who bless Him and curse those who cursed Him. And so there, the point is not that he loved Jacob and that God hated Esau. The point is that the country Edom, who came from Esau, would turn against Israel, but God kept His promise to Israel to protect them. And so that's kind of understanding some of the confusion there. But what is Esau's response personally to what Jacob, his younger brother, did to him, how Jacob tricked him? It says in verse 41, now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. then I will kill my brother Jacob. So what he's saying there is Isaac is so old, he could die any day now, and he knows it's coming. And so he's plotting, kind of just like Cain did. You know, after some time, after his father passes away, Esau has decided that he wants to kill Jacob. But then it says in verse 42, the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. And you gotta love how she words what you have done to him, right? But then she says, then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day? Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? And so to understand this, Esau has already married some of the women of the Hittites from that land. And so this has already happened. And so what she's saying is, if Jacob does the same thing, you know, they're already in agony because the daughters of Esau are causing these problems for them. And so the reason why, really it's twofold. That's true. And so perhaps she does want Jacob to have a better wife, but also keep in mind, this was an excuse to send Jacob away as well because of Esau's plot and him wanting to destroy his brother. And so that's kind of a twofold reason that Jacob gets sent away. And so the response in Genesis 28 now, verse 1, is that then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from there one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Padan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. So, what Isaac wants to do for his son Jacob is kind of like what his father Abraham did for him. We discussed that back when we were in, what was that, Genesis chapter, chapter 24, verse 1, when it says that, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. And then they go into that discussion, which we've studied already. What Abraham was doing is he was wanting to pick a successful, faithful marriage for his son Isaac, which ended up working out because what was Abraham and the servant doing? They were praying about it. They were putting it in God's hands. They were looking for the marriage for their son of someone who had a good moral character and looking for signs of that. And so it had worked out. And what we're going to see here is that, and by the way, we saw at the end there that even Isaac, he was meditating in the field. He knew what was going on, and so they're putting it in God's hands. Now Isaac sincerely wants to do the same thing for his son Jacob. But we're going to see here that Jacob, he doesn't see it the same way. Yeah, he goes to that land, but we hear nothing about going to God in prayer. It's possible it did, but we're about to see that Jacob makes his decision for marriage based on looks, based on attraction, which is not wrong in and of itself. But when all of it is based on that and nothing is considered, what does the person believe? What is this person's kind of character? When the decision is solely based on attraction, then it's not a wise decision. For example, we have the scripture in the Bible that says, and which is talking about something else, but he says, can two walk together if they are not agreed? Well, we have a good picture of that in the New Testament, and I'm going to say this, and you guys say, oh, I don't know about that one, but just give it some time. Paul and Barnabas, they separate on that road. Now I know this was a disagreement. Paul and Barnabas, they disagreed whether they should take John Mark. But the point is, it paints a good picture of us, for us. What did they say? They said, we can't agree whether we should take this man along with us. So they separate. They realized we're not going to be able to go on this journey together anymore because we don't agree on this thing. So, not to say that that's the same situation, but taking that picture and saying, if you don't agree on something, how are you going to walk together? How are you going to get along together, right? Think of it this way. You have one person who's a Christian household, and they say when it comes to marriage, it doesn't matter because what matters is love. And what matters is that we're attracted to each other. And that's really what matters. Okay? Now they have children. What are they going to believe about alcohol? You see what I'm saying? What if one parent says, no, I want this in my life? And again, we're not talking about alcohol today, but I'm painting an illustration here. What if they disagree on that subject? What if they disagree on, let's make it practical. Our child wants to go to this dance. What if they disagree? Who's going to make that decision? You see, the wisdom of the Bible is, for a lot of these difficult things, if the two people agree on the matter of faith, on what they believe, on how they're going to go about it, it's a lot easier, isn't it? It's a lot simpler. And so I think we're more dealing with wisdom here, that, yeah, you can put yourself in a difficult situation. You may say, well, it's not wrong, or I can marry whoever I want, but is it the wise thing to do? Is it going to prevent a lot of the problems? And so I think what we walk away with there in Genesis 24 with Abraham and Isaac is that Abraham was doing his son a favor. He was wanting him to marry someone who would walk in the same direction as him, towards faith in God, and prevent a lot of these problems. But now when Jacob goes to Laban and he goes to that land, he's going to make this decision based on only attraction. I just want to get that point clear, because a lot of people, they may hear something like that and say, no, attraction isn't wrong. I'm not saying attraction is not important in marriage. And I'm not saying it's wrong to be attracted and make a decision with attraction. But is faith considered at all? Is moral character considered at all? Is the wisdom of God considered at all? The deciding factor for Jacob is going to be attraction. And if we think there was no consequence to that, we're going to see how idols were brought into Jacob's household. And it's clear what God is saying, that those idols got in there because of Jacob's decisions. And it led to idolatry. So he's going to go over there, but we want to make the point. Esau has married more than one woman. When Jacob goes to Laban and he goes there and he meets their household, he's going to marry more than one woman. We've said it before, but we want to repeat it so we don't forget. did God approve of that? Because we may look at other religions and other beliefs and someone says, well, they did it, and it appears, I'm reading the Old Testament and we see it all the time. So what we're looking at today is this picture that Christians are taking the Old Testament and trying to make it seem like it fits the current belief today? Or is it that God was always opposed to having more than one wife from the beginning? Let's go back to the book of Genesis, because again, everything starts in the beginning. God gave his design for marriage in the beginning. And so just because men broke that or disobeyed that, well, that doesn't prove anything, because isn't that the point of the Bible, that men have been sinning since the garden, since the beginning? But what was God's original model? When you go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 21, it says that the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. And by the way, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, Jacob is about to repeat that phrase when he meets Rachel, his wife. But that idea there is he's supposed to treat her like his own bones. And he is supposed to treat her like his own flesh. And so Paul repeats it in the New Testament that a man must love his wife the same way that Christ loved the church. And he laid down his own life for her. But this is even what God was teaching since the beginning of creation. And so then in verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. Be faithful to his wife. Not send her away, not divorce, but stay with and be faithful to his wife, singular, one wife. And they shall become one flesh. Okay, then they're married, and the man and his wife, and he goes on to the setting where they were both naked and not ashamed. They were in the perfect setting. There was no sin. There was no shame. But the fact is, that was God's model. Now, if we ever questioned that, if we ever doubted it, when you go to Matthew chapter 19, and they ask Jesus, is it okay to divorce? Is it okay to divorce? He goes back to the garden, and he says, well, let man, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So, according to Jesus, that design we're reading in the Garden of Eden is what God wanted. And so, you have one marriage between a man and a woman. And so, just because Abraham listened to his wife because she couldn't conceive and he took another one, and just because Jacob is going to do the same thing, and just because Esau did it, that doesn't mean that God approved of it. What it means is these were faithful men, and they made mistakes. And as we're going to see with Jacob, a lot of them, they paid dearly for their mistakes. So it's not true that there's the Christian belief and a lot of us are, making the Old Testament fit that. No, this was God's plan from the very beginning. And a lot of people went astray. And when Jesus came on the scene, he wanted people to understand what God's plan was from the beginning. And so in that way, Jesus really brought people back to God's will. And so, again, these people are not going to stick with that model, but that doesn't mean it wasn't God's will. It means they went against God's will, and God didn't give up on them just because maybe they didn't listen to him a couple times. And we have the same thing, that we're walking by faith, and we're going to make mistakes. And we should, be thankful to God that when we make mistakes and when we don't listen to him, he doesn't just throw his relationship with us away. He gives us grace, and he gives us patience, and he gives us time, and he tries to teach us. So that's what we're looking at as we move along here. And so But Isaac wants to do the same thing with Jacob. He wants to send him to a place where he could find a marriage partner who will agree with him, who will agree with how they want to go about their life and follow God. But it's Jacob's choice whether he wants that kind of marriage himself. And so there in verse 5, we see Isaac sent Jacob away. And then in verse 6, Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram to take a wife from there. And that as he blessed him, he directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women." And that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Now there's two ways to see this. Either Esau was bitter and he saw that these women that I've married, they don't please my parents, so I'm going to go and do another marriage. Or maybe Esau was trying to make things right. And again, it's kind of like a mess. Like, you're already married and now you're going to get married again to try and make it better. But it's a real possibility. Maybe he saw, okay, Jacob received the blessing. I've made some mistakes. These women that I've married, they're making it difficult for my parents, so let me marry someone else, right? But he's still not going according to God's design, according to God's model. And I think what we learned here, sometimes we try and make things better ourselves. And, I messed up here, but maybe if I go about it this way, and it's kind of like, I need the GPS if I go anywhere. I'm not a direction-oriented person. I always need the GPS. And sometimes I say, this GPS doesn't know what it's talking about because this obviously going to take longer. I'm going to go this way instead. And then I realize, oh, wait a minute, the GPS knew what it was talking about. But, I'm just going to go this way. And so I keep going, and I realize this is an hour trip, and it should have took 30 minutes. I should have just listened to the direction in the first place. And I think that's the lesson we take here. And what it comes down to is this: we have to trust God. And if we use our own wits, if we use our own understanding, sometimes we cause more trouble for ourselves. We turn a 30-minute trip into an hour trip. And the solution is not to take all these different directions to try and scramble and make it right. We got to get back to what God said, to his original design. We have to take the word of God for what it says and trust God, and we'll prevent a lot of this. We'll prevent a lot of these mistakes. If they didn't follow their desire and what they wanted, if they didn't follow their understanding, if they trusted God, things work out a lot better. Out of the three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaac only had Rebekah. And we have this much less, right, about Isaac. And you have some, I think God wanted to show there's still some flaws there. But you realize you have so much less about Isaac. And I think because his life was a lot more straightforward. So what it means is we want to prevent that in the first place. And the way we prevent it is by trusting God. If we've already made some mistakes, if we've already gotten ourselves into trouble, this is the story for us, because we're going to see Jacob's life, and we're going to see how God was still there for him in his life, and he was still able to save him and help him in the end. But we have to do what Jacob's eventually going to learn. Let's not try and control everything. Let's not try and take all these different turns and fix it ourselves in a different way. Let's just trust God. And let's not say there's a greater good. I can do this wrong thing in this situation because that's trusting our own knowledge. That's trusting our own understanding. We have to decide one thing. We're going to trust God, and we're going to do what's right. And we're going to see the great power that God has for our life. And if we can trust God and make a decision, we're going to trust what He says and do what's right. We're going to see things work out in our life. There's going to be things we see, wow, I could have got away with that if I did this. Wow, I could have, come up on this situation if I wasn't honest. Or I wouldn't have maybe gone through this suffering if I didn't stand up for what was right. And maybe if I just, didn't do what was right, I wouldn't. That's going to happen, but generally speaking, if we do the right thing and we trust God, things will always work out better. Our life will always work out better. And we have eternity promised to us. And so it's a win-win. And so with that being said, the lesson is yours this evening. If you need to come to Christ tonight, or if you want to learn about how to do that, how did Jesus offer salvation, and how do we receive grace to respond to it? You have that opportunity to learn it. If you've already learned and tonight's the night, then don't hesitate. If you need prayers of the congregation tonight, you need to ask a prayer request, and you need to let people know what to pray for you about. You have that opportunity. Please don't hesitate as we stand and sing our invitation song.